Good evening and welcome to the panel discussion on economy and trade at the India Economic Forum at LITFest. In 2022, the government of India is set to bring the new foreign trade policy. This document will guide the direction of the broader trade policy of India for the foreseeable future. But formulating such a trade policy in 2022 is proving to be a difficult task. A tough balance has to be struck between the tough geopolitical realities of the post-COVID world and our move towards self-reliance. Our panel of experts discuss all this and more this evening in the aforesaid panel. One of our primary speakers is Dr. Vijay Kelkar, former chairman of the 13th Finance Commission. Dr. Vijay Kelkar is one of India's preeminent economists. He has served as the former finance secretary as well as the chairman of the 13th Finance Commission of India. For his services to the country, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan, India's second highest civilian award, in January 2011. He is also known as the architect of the GST. Dr. Kelkar was advisor to the Minister of Finance between 2002 and 2004 and finance secretary between 98-99. And in 99, he was nominated as executive director of India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka to the board of the IMF. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, executive chairman and founder of 5F World, which is a platform for digital startups, skills, and social ventures in the country. He is also co-founder of Global Talent Track, Skills Alpha, and Lighthouse Communities Foundation, as well as two Indo-US joint ventures, namely CalZoom Advisors and the Center for AI and Advanced Analytics. He also serves on the boards of Principal Asset Management, Hinduja Global Solutions, Educate Girls, Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, Singapore, Systech Inc., and Social Venture Partners, USA. Dr. Ashwini Mahajan is national co-convener of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, an Indian political and cultural organization. The SJM is affiliated with the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS. Dr. Mahajan is an author, a columnist, and associate professor at the PGDAV College. He's also served as chief editor of the Journal of Contemporary Indian Polity and Economy since 2011. He also serves as a visiting professor at Pacific University, Udaipur, and Mewar University. His research primarily focuses on the WTO as well as international trade agreements. Ambassador Mohan Kumar is chairman of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, which he served at since 2018. RIS is a leading Delhi-based think tank which engages in policy research relating to trade, technology, investment, development, connectivity, and South-South cooperation. Dr. Aijaz Wani is research fellow at ORF, the Observer Research Foundation. He is currently working on the project Kashmir Conflict Managing Perceptions and Prospectus for Peace. Designed in the form of questionnaires and surveys with key stakeholders, the project is based on the Kashmiri youth perspective. Wani also tracks the minorities of China, the radicalization in Pakistan, and Greater Central Asia. He is widely published in international and national peer-reviewed journals. Ambassador Smita Purushottam is founder of Sitara, and while serving as a former ambassador, she had a long and rich history of introducing innovative ideas into the government machinery, which also fed into the outlook towards India's foreign policy. Serving across a cross-section of countries, she's skilled in forecasting, management, and leadership. She dedicates herself henceforth to promoting a scientific spirit and making India a science state through a new do tank, Sitara, Science, Indigenous Technology, and Advanced Research Accelerator in India. Pranay Lekhi is legal advisor, international arbitration, Allen and Overy, United Kingdom. Pranay is an India qualified advocate and legal advisor in the international arbitration team at Allen and Overy. With deep expertise in investment law, he has witnessed firsthand the 41st session of the United Nations Commission on International Relations Trade Law Working Group 3 on investor-state dispute settlement reform as an advisor to the Republic of Maldives. Pranay was also a part of the expert subcommittee of the Law Commission of India to study the 2015 Indian Model Bilateral Investment Treaty. His research on key areas of international law, including international arbitration and nuclear disarmament, has been published in leading international journals. With this, I'd like to invite Sri Samir Kochar, Chairman, SKOCH Group, for his opening remarks.
Namaskar and welcome to the panel on economy and trade in India Economic Forum and LITFest. While Rohan did introduce Dr. Vijay Kelkar, I'd like to say additional 2 lines that he's been a friend, philosopher, and guide for me for years. And very cherished thing is that I think he was conferred the SKOCH Lifetime Achievement Award, SKOCH Challenger Award, I had the privilege of making a documentary film on his life and editing a fest shift in his honor called India on the Growth Turnpike. So he uh, remains our beacon of hope. He's a giant in the economic reform uh, landscape of India, and I'm really thankful that he's found time out of his busy schedule, purely out of love and affection for me, to chair this session and moderate it. We have been talking about RCEP since 2018. It was India Economic Forum in 2019 when RCEP was almost a fait accompli. Practically everyone and his brother was pushing India to sign RCEP. The only opposition, people who could stand up and say, no, this is not good for India, it was led by Ashwini Mahajan. And right flanking him was Smita Purushottam of Sitara and Samir Kuchar of SKOCH. And suddenly, while no one expected, the Honorable Prime Minister went there and he said, no, we are not going to sign this deal. So I think it took the entire country by surprise. The only people who were not surprised was possibly the three of us, because we understand very well as to where his thinking comes from. However, 2 years have passed since, after November 2019, since the Honorable PM said that we are not going to sign RCEP. The geopolitical situation today has changed somewhat. One has been COVID, where there has been a complete disruption of supply chain, which has taught us how these interdependencies kind of play out and how difficult it is to manage these disruptions. And now, recently, with the Russia-Ukraine standoff, there again is a question mark. And however much we say that we should look at it long term and medium term, let's not look at it short term. The fact of the matter is that you cannot really divorce these issues from geopolitics of it. Geopolitics would always, in fact, before coming on the panel, I was reading an article on LinkedIn where somebody said that this war is going to break the US petrodollar construct. And, the main trade for oil is going to be ruble, gold, and yuan backed some payment system. And by putting Russia out of SWIFT, West has kind of, shot themselves in the foot. Now, I don't know whether this is yet another conspiracy story. I don't know whether something actually is happening there. But the backdrop, whether we like it or not, to this discussion remains, the recent happenings and whatever we say and do, some part of that has to come through the prism of that. So we've kind of looked at three areas. So when we said that let's not do RCEP, that was 2019. And that time also the argument was that India has to become Atmanirbhar and let's do this Atmanirbhar growth. And, let's build India through Indians, through all of this. So after we have not signed RCEP, what has been the experience? One is that duties have gone up on raw materials. But the local producers of raw materials are exploiting Indian MSMEs and overcharging them. You have examples like all of us letting go of imported software and saying that we'll adopt something like Zoho, which is a poster boy of India software. And the minute you do that and Ministry of MSME says that, yeah, buy Indian software, buy Zoho, and they get that endorsement, they increase their rates by 25% for MSMEs. So is it better to be exploited by Indian companies or MNCs? I don't know, because I think being exploited is a given, whichever situation you are in. So, how do you handle that? The second part of the construct is that when you say that we are going to build India and we're going to do Atmanirbharta, 94% of our businesses are MSMEs. And MSME is like agriculture. You can pour your heart into it, you can pour your life into it, but nothing changes. Every policy that is made with an inbuilt kill switch. So while we've seen a lot of action, where is the Atmanirbhar growth coming for MSCs and how many of them have actually got into manufacturing and what has really changed? So that's a big question mark that there is. The third argument that we had used was that, okay, let's privatize. Why is everything state-owned? And government did privatize, big bang privatization. Air India was privatized, but then the question is, that the first move itself they make, will the government hold their hand, or they would actually be privatized and their board will decide who their CEO is. So there are a lot of questions. So I am saying that Smita ji just before this asked me, why are we revisiting this RCEP thing? And I said, I am revisiting it because there are valid questions that are being raised in 2019 November. Today we are in 2022. Some time has elapsed. So what has changed? When we say Atmanirbhar Bharat and change in policy and proactive action, have we been able to do anything beyond lip service on that? So that's one part of the argument. The second part of the argument, of course, is a wonderful book that was jointly authored by Dr. Vijay Kelkar, by Ganesh Natarajan, and several others, which was published by International Pune International Center, and it was Rising Up to the China Challenge. And the whole book argued that do we really have to, fight? Can we not kind of give growth and cooperate? And, do we really have to fight China? And so his entire argument was that, maybe we should look at working closely with them, cooperating with them. So there is another path. And if you look at Dr. Ranade, who was one of his co-authors, also feels that, yeah, perhaps, time has come to re-examine our decision on RCEP. Then there is the question of the geopolitical thing, as I talked about. So there are many, many dimensions to this issue. It's a very vast issue. And actually, nothing is less important than the other. And in that context, I had invited Dr. Vijay Kelkar because he's got the gravitas to add the least, because I think this is going to be a highly polarized discussion. Unlike all the other discussions that we've had in India Economic Forum so far, that we have been able to build some form of consensus. So yesterday I was joking with Saibal Dasgupta, saying that since you are from the press, so you are the third pillar. And so maybe, you have the most centrist of views, right? So at the end of it, you could help us come together as to, okay, so this is a common minimum program. At least there's a consensus. At least we should agree on something. And Ashwini ji is very happy to agree to disagree as a consensus. So this is where we are. The way this program is structured, we are going to do it in 3 rounds. Round 1 is going to be articulating the problem statement. So each round will have 30 minutes. The problem statement is, when we say economy and trade, do we really need to look at trade? Why are we revisiting trade? What is it that is lacking today? We have killed, ended all the bilaterals. What has that meant? We have not signed RCEP. What has that meant? Are we stronger? Are we weaker? Are we status quo? Are we on a higher growth path? So what is the problem statement? Or are we saying things are hunky-dory in trade and India needs to do nothing? So that's the part 1. So what is the problem? So everyone will get a chance, and Dr. Kelkar will, do the traffic management in terms of who speaks first and who speaks next. Part 2 is, having defined the problem framework, what is it that can be done realistically? So that will again be going from panelist to panelist. What do you think should be done? And then we finally get to a third point, which is a recommendation. So this is a recommendation. So Government of India should do what? Regulator should do what? Trade bloc should do what? So whoever is that recommendation meant for, at the final point, we will take the recommendations. And at the end of it, perhaps we'll try and use Saibal's wisdom before Dr. Kelkar's closing remarks to try and bring together some sense of what he thinks could be a consensus path. By then, we have reached that. So with that, I welcome you once again, and very grateful to you, Dr. Kelkar, for honoring us by chairing this session. Over to you, sir.
Samir, let me first thank you for your kind invitation and very, very gracious remarks you made. You're so persuasive, Samir, that even knowing that I'm not really up to the task, I accepted this only because of your persuasive powers. You already outlined how we're going to conduct this. Now, on the first leg of the today's discussion, let me start with inviting my distinguished colleague, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan. Ganesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Kelkar. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kelkar. Very privileged to be on this panel. And thank you, Samir, I think, for the kind of work you do and continue to engage in terms of very interesting topics. I'll just take off from what you mentioned. I mean, when we wrote this book on facing up to the China challenge, the logic was not confrontation. The logic was not partnership either. But we all felt, I mean, if you look at the history of China and India, we all know that there was a time not so long ago when China and India were comparable. And between the two of us, we literally had a major share of the world economy. But over a period of time, while China, of course, through some very interesting policies and moving the agrarian worker to industrial society, they managed to reach $14 trillion in GDP, while we were still stuck at about 3 trillion. So one, I mean, when the book argues that there are three dimensions to any progress for India. And the first, of course, is that, I mean, very active on the economic front, which is where I come in, because I'm really a student of the economy, apart from having been part of manufacturing and information technology forever. And we've actually looked at various sectors and say that, look, not just Atmanirbhar, but how do we build Atmanirbhar in one context, less dependence on China, definitely in areas like rare earths, et cetera, and telecom we're already doing with 5G. And most important, how do we identify tiger sectors which can really take us to global dominance? I mean, the whole information communications technology clearly is one. We have the opportunity in pharma, we have the opportunity in many sectors. Then we also said that, look, trade, the point that Samir, you mentioned, is extremely important, but we need to choose our battles. I mean, signing multiple trade agreements with 40 countries really gets us nowhere. And we argued that there is a case for very deep relationships with certain countries. Okay, clearly what we have seen with the recent agreement with UAE has the potential to be something like that. So that's much more useful to us. And the third, of course, is diplomacy. And what we argued is that, like, while we do all this, we must be very clear about reaching out to China's neighbors on one hand, and which is where RCEP, etc., comes in, and also about India's own neighbors to make sure that, look, we continue to have a significant voice and a seat at the head of the table. So to articulate the problem as the first part of this, I think the problem for India is how do we ensure we continue to grow, not at 4 or 5%, but over the foreseeable future, how do we outline a path for ourselves where we can grow the economy 8 to 10% every year for the next maybe 20 years? So we're all talking about India at 47. And yesterday, Dr. Kelkar was talking about the need to articulate a medium point of view and a long-term point of view. So if you say the medium point of view is by 2030, which is, by the way, the topic of the next book we're writing from the Pune International Center, and the slightly longer term is 2047, which is India at 100, I think the problem is, are we clear that how are we going to look like in 2047? What is the level of our ambition? And how do we walk that target backwards towards 2030 and to getting started now? So whether it is the green economy, whether it is Atmanirbhar, whether it is, I mean, obviously inclusive growth in society, which is the area that I'm working on, I think that is the problem. That how do we ensure that we balance all these forces and at the same time ensure that nothing is left behind and nobody is left behind. So to my mind, that is the problem, to ensure that India is able to stand up to roaring economies like China, as well as, of course, some of the Western economies. And at the same time, as a model of growth in a democratic environment, which can be successful. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ganesh. Let me now request Ambassador Purushottam if she would like to make a presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelkar. It is a great honor for me to be part of this very eminent panel and for the opportunity to share Sitara's views on this important issue. Basically, I will just make 3 points and I'll leave the conclusion and the recommendation for the third round. And the first is how, what you've already referred to and how the current geopolitical scenario should affect our policy on this particular issue. Then I will make the point that we need to go on an evidence-based, we need to adopt an evidence-based approach and not an ideological approach. Which I think some of the proponents of free trade agreements are prone to do. And I also want to talk about the national security angle, which Sitara has been very much involved with and concerned about in this particular issue. So, and as I said, I'll follow up with the recommendation in the third round. So first of all, the geopolitical angle, it's very clear to us that it's a very dangerous and unprecedented situation with one decoupling already ongoing between the United States and China, pretty successful in the semiconductor area, but a very unprecedented and massive decoupling going on between the entire West and Russia. And simultaneously, we're seeing the weaponization of trade and financial instruments to a degree that should give us pause. Secondly, regarding evidence-based approach, we have, great research done by Dr. Smita Francis and people like her, which show that every FTA that we have signed has led to a collapse of our electronics industry. Now, I think we'll all agree that this electronics, which is part of information and communications technologies, is the foundational critical infrastructure sector of our country. And we cannot afford to have it completely taken over by foreigners. I won't go too long into what we found, how the Chinese have penetrated our networks. So we feel that, and we took this up on national security grounds, which is actually my third point, but I'll just refer to it briefly here, that China had got control of our communications networks to a great degree, penetrated power grid, penetrated BSNL, all sensitive government communications were being carried there. So we carried out a campaign, we went to the National Security Council Secretariat, etc. So government, we feel, did the right thing by not joining RCP, because the simple thing about RCP, which Smita Francis has pointed out, is that we already have free trade agreements with the key members, ASEAN, Japan, South Korea, and we've suffered a lot because of that. And because we joined the ITA 1, China held off joining it until it became strong enough to withstand the competition. And thenceforth, China has already got a route. It's rerouting a lot of exports through ASEAN. Thenceforth, we would have just basically advantaged China by joining the RCP. So we felt that that was strategically and from national security angle not at all in India's interests. And one of the most important things about FTAs, and the most dangerous aspect, is that it includes government procurement. With government procurement being of the order of around $500 billion per year, we've been gifting this entire amount to foreign companies which have penetrated our procurement system, and they've got a stranglehold on it. We're fighting this also, and Swadeshi Jagamanch has done enormous work on this also. And if we go back to free trade agreements, RCEP, etc., we undo all this work. We bring a very powerful country which will undermine our national security, and the free trade agreement will override all national security considerations. In fact, these free trade agreements are more like free pass agreements, and we can go into that a little later. I mean, it has shrunk our policy space to a great extent. I've got some figures on FDI, for example, in electronics industry, which is really shocking how low it is. So, regarding national security, China is not the only security threat. Security threat, because we've been studying cybersecurity, emanates from a whole lot of other sources, including the United States, the internet platforms, and therefore, and a huge amount of surveillance that intelligence agencies are conducting, the data they're gathering, which can be weaponized against us, which is being weaponized in various contexts. And therefore, we need to firewall our ICT ecosystem. And this will be impossible if we join an FTA. We need to put national security above everything. Now, I concede and absolutely agree and would like to work to make India a competitive economy. And our recommendation to improve the R&D intensity of our economy is in that direction, but I'll go into greater detail in that in the third round. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. May I now request Dr. Mahajan to share his views?
Thank you, Dr. Vijay Kelkar ji. In fact, it's really an honor to be in this panel with you. I endorse whatever Ambassador Smita Purushottam ji had said on the national security issue. And I would request you to kindly see, because you, our Ganesh Natarajan ji had raised certain points, and before that, Sameer Kochhar ji has raised some points about the RCEP and not joining RCEP, whether it was a good or a bad idea, or we should look at it in the changed circumstances. तो मेरा यहाँ निवेदन यह है कि हमें अपनी समस्या को समझना पड़ेगा, जैसा कि आपने शुरू में ही कहा कि समस्या क्या है। हमने अपने आज़ादी के पहले 40 साल गवा दिए एक सोच के आधार पर, और दूसरे अगले 30 साल हमने गवाए इस सोच के आधार पर कि हम अपनी इकोनॉमी को ओपन करने के बाद हमारी इंडस्ट्री कॉम्पिटिटिव हो जाएगी और हम दुनिया में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में बहुत आगे बढ़ जाएंगे और मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब बन जाएंगे। ऐसा हुआ नहीं। हुआ क्यों नहीं? क्योंकि हम हर बार, ये शायद भारत सरकार की, भारतीयों की एक रहा है कि हम किसी भी चीज से बहुत ऑब्सेस्ड हो जाते हैं। जब हम पब्लिक सेक्टर के साथ चल रहे थे तो पब्लिक सेक्टर से बहुत ऑब्सेस्ड थे, और जब हम ग्लोबलाइजेशन के साथ चले तो फिर हम ग्लोबलाइजेशन से इतने ऑब्सेस्ड हो गए कि WTO में जबकि प्रावधान था कि हम अपने टैरिफ्स को 40% तक रख सकते थे, लेकिन उस ऑब्सेशन के चलते हमने उस टैरिफ को 10% पे ला करके खड़ा कर दिया। हमने ये भी नहीं देखा कि चीन से लगातार डंपिंग हो रही है, हमारे उद्योगों को खत्म करने का प्रयास हो रहा है। मैं आपको एक उदाहरण के नाते बताता हूँ, एपीआई का। तो एपीआई में हम 90% हम सेल्फ डिपेंडेंट थे और 10% हम इंपोर्ट करते थे। इस कालखंड के दौरान उन्होंने ऐसे प्रयास किए कि आज हम 90% उन पर डिपेंडेंट हैं और 10%। यह कोई कंपटीशन का सवाल नहीं था, ये उनके द्वारा एक डेलिब्रेट पॉलिसीज के तहत हुआ था। अभी मैं यूपीएल के चेयरमैन हैं एक कंपनी के, उनसे बात कर रहा था, तो उन्होंने अभी एक प्लांट अभी डाला है अपने केमिकल का, सोडियम साइनाइड का। तो सोडियम साइनाइड की कीमत 250 रुपये होती थी। अभी चूंकि उन्होंने वो प्लांट लगा दिया है और चीन को ये लगता है कि उनका सामान उस प्लांट को चलने नहीं देना है, एकदम से उसको 170 रुपये उसकी कीमत कर दी। पेनिसिलिन जी एक उदाहरण है, जब $22 का रेट था उन्होंने $9 कर दिया, और $9 करने के बाद जब हमारे यहाँ के सब प्लांट्स बंद हो गए तो उसको $35 कर दिया। तो हमें इस बात को समझना होगा कि हम कॉपरेशन से, कंपटीशन से, आरसेप करके हम उस कंपटीशन से डरते नहीं हैं, लेकिन उसके आधार पर जो ग्लोबलाइजेशन के नाम पर अनफेयर ट्रेड होती है, उसको तो हमें समझना पड़ेगा। और आज जब हम आत्मनिर्भर भारत की बात कर रहे हैं तो उन सब चीजों को अंडू करने का प्रयास कर रहे हैं। जो हमारे से गलतियां हो गई 30 साल में, उसको अंडू तो करना पड़ेगा ना। और अगर हम अपनी इंडस्ट्री को रीबिल्ड नहीं करेंगे, और आरसेप इज नॉट अबाउट मैं समीर जी आपसे बताना चाहूंगा, आरसेप केवल ये नहीं है कि आज जो हमारे स्मॉल स्केल इंडस्ट्री के लिए रॉ मटेरियल महंगा हो गया है। यस, जहां जहां ये महंगा हुआ है और हमारे जो डोमेस्टिक इंडस्ट्री है उसको एक्सप्लॉइट कर रही है, ये मोनोपोलाइज कर रही है, उसको ठीक करने की जरूरत है। अभी मेरी बात हुई है मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ स्टील में कि कैसे एक टिन का इंपोर्ट एकदम से बैन कर दिया गया, जो उसके कारण हमारे स्मॉल स्केल इंडस्ट्री को नुकसान हुआ। उसको हम समाधान कर सकते हैं, जहां जहां समस्याएं हैं उसका समाधान करते हुए, लेकिन जरूरत इस बात की है कि जो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हम 15% से 25% तक लाना चाहते हैं, जो हम अपने देश में, आप समझते हैं कि एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन केवल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग के माध्यम से हो सकता है। मैन्युफैक्चरिंग अगर हम आगे बढ़ेंगे, और उसके लिए जो आज चूंकि WTO कमजोर हुआ है, हम इस बात से खुश हैं कि WTO कमजोर है, और उस कमजोरी के कारण आज हम जो PLI स्कीम ला पा रहे हैं, नहीं तो वहीं WTO में ही उसको रिजेक्ट कर दिया जाता। प्रोडक्शन लिंक्ड इंसेंटिव स्कीम्स के माध्यम से, टैरिफ्स बढ़ाने के माध्यम से, जो कि विद इन द WTO लिमिट्स हैं। ऐसे सब तरीके से हम एक बार फिर से अपने देश में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग को वापस लाना चाहते हैं। और आरसेप हमने इसलिए केवल नहीं किया कि हम चाइना से डरते थे, आरसेप हमने केवल इसलिए नहीं किया कि इसलिए मना नहीं किया कि हम किसी एक क्षेत्र में या दूसरे क्षेत्र की बात कर रहे थे। आरसेप हम बहुत सारे कारणों से नहीं किया, उसमें डेयरी एक बहुत बड़ा फैक्टर था। तो अगर आज हम आरसेप के बारे में दोबारा सोचेंगे तो क्या हम उन 10 करोड़ लोगों को छोड़ देंगे कि जो लोग डेयरी में लगे हुए हैं, उनकी एम्प्लॉयमेंट को हम कैसे फोरगो कर सकते हैं, उसके बारे में हमें विचार करना पड़ेगा। मुझे लगता है कि अभी जो समस्या के बारे में आपने कहा, कि समस्या आज हमारी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग को आगे बढ़ाने की है, हमारे ऑलरेडी जो ट्रेडिशनल ऑक्यूपेशन है उनको बचाने की है, और इस देश को मैन्युफैक्चरिंग हब बनाने के लिए जो जो प्रयास हम कर सकते हैं उसकी है। और सबसे बड़ी बात है रोजगार बढ़ाने की है, उद्यमिता विकास की है। लघु उद्योगों को, स्मॉल और कुटीर उद्योगों को और आगे बढ़ाने की जरूरत होगी। इसके लिए हम जो जो कुछ आत्मनिर्भर भारत के तहत कर सकते हैं, मुझे लगता है कि सरकार को इसके बारे में हमें फ्री हैंड देना होगा। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. May I now invite our colleague Ayazwani is here. Please have you have the floor.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, sir. My argument is that until and unless we change our own infrastructure and industrial policy, we cannot build up and have trade agreements with the different unions. For example, RCEP or Eurasian Economic Union. But we are looking in other way. For example, if we can have a free trade agreement, because now geopolitics has changed, but if we can have free trade agreement with Eurasian Union, Eurasian Economic Union, the population there is 183 million and GDP is approximately more than 7 trillion. If it is, sorry, there is azan going on, so you may be disturbed. So if it may be finalized without any delay, the free trade agreement with Eurasian Economic Union will give India direct access to the region's huge hydrocarbon resources as well as open doors to the Eurasian market. See, the trade turnover between Eurasian Economic Union and the Republic of India in 2020 amounted about 15 billion US dollars. That includes $8.3 billion of exports and $6 billion of imports. Now, the trade has increased a lot from 2016, but still, there are certain issues which we need to think of. For example, the connectivity issues, Chabrabad port, and from there to connectivity with that Eurasian Union via Akshabad agreement, because Afghanistan is now gone. There is Taliban, we cannot have good relations with them. So that is one problem. But we need to stress on the infrastructure routes, infrastructure projects, whereby we can reach out to Akshabad and from Akshabad to anywhere to this union. For this, secondly, to reach out there, we have to also change our economic policy within. We have to try to grow our industries more, and we have to try to inculcate in our service sector new technologies, new techniques, so that we can provide them more services, and that will be helpful for us. Another aspect of this, my understanding is that tourism and education is another sector where we can have good trade relations with Eurasian Economic Union. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ayasa. Now, is Ambassador Kumar is here? Mohan? We can hear you, Samir.
Sir, he's unable to join today.
Okay. Then may I request Saibalji? You have to unmute, Dr. Saab. Saibal, you have to unmute.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Thank you. Yeah, no, you're. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelkar sir. Basically, talking about the problem, I think we are in the business, we have been in the business of sitting and judging whether we should give our business to foreigners or not, and why should we let foreigners take away our business, our markets. But there are two things. Why have we not concentrated on growing ourselves? You see, take the example of a small scale industry. The guy who sets up a small company, the last thing he thinks is foreign trade. He is never thinking of selling it to Russia or to America or to China or to Germany. Even that concept, even that thought is not there in India. He's only thinking, he's not even thinking of selling, a guy in Odisha is not thinking of selling it to Bengal. He's only thinking of selling it to the next district. So the guy in Cuttack is only thinking of selling to Bhubaneswar at the most, no more. So do we have that kind of thinking? Do we have, and the big problem that we have, and this is what we saw in the pandemic also, we produce nearly half of what we require, sometimes even less. We did not even have sufficient leave aside medicines. We did not have sufficient oxygen cylinders. So you see, we don't think big. We are thinking so small. And then we battle over whether we should give away our business or keep our business to ourselves. And then within that, again, we divide whether we should give the business to the larger monopolies or the smaller companies. But the whole focus on growth is never there, from the lowest level to the highest level. So can we for once focus on growth? That is one. Second, you see, the question about weaponization of data. There is so much weaponization that is possible that we have to be careful about, which is why Atmanirbhar is a brilliant, fantastic idea, provided we do it and not make it a slogan. For example, APIs that we import, 70% of our APIs for the pharma industry comes from only one country, China. Now, it is a weapon. It is a weapon not just for political reasons, but also because of reasons like pandemic. During pandemic times, China was, not possible for China to supply all the APIs that our pharma companies needed. So this, you see, we are sitting on a set of uncertainty when it comes to APIs that can be weaponized. Look at the IT industry. Almost every IT company that we have is connected to the West, mostly to the US. And what are we doing? We are consuming IT products from the US, all of us. We have not come up with an Indian replica of anything, not even social media. Today, WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, and you may even ask me what is the need to do it. But so many countries have their own Facebook, have their own WhatsApp, have their own Twitter. Even our e-commerce companies that we have, a few of them, are heavily funded by foreign companies, like Flipkart, or Amazon is completely foreign company. So what Atmanirbhar are we talking about? Can anybody name 5 major softwares that the world is buying which has come from India? No. And we are supposed to be a software country. No, we are not producing original software at all. Our companies are only developing, so-called developers, using software produced in other countries. So the point here is this: are we going at a large speed? Number one. Are we thinking big? Number two. Are we focusing on R&D and expanding our capabilities? Number three. Why are we more concentrated in dividing what we have rather than expanding it? So this is basically the issue. The issue is growth. Once that, you see, when you don't have things, there is a whole question of dividing and supplying comes in. The whole point is about growth. Can we grow for once? That is my main focus. There is the other issue about weaponization, which I mentioned. we have to do a very close non-government analysis on and a very open-minded analysis on what is lacking. What are the areas? I was listening to television, and a lady who manufactures a certain kind of product was on one of the channels, and she said that she is buying a certain kind of an alloy which is used as a paint on her machine. But that alloy may be just about 2%, which she gets from China. But even if it's 2%, that alloy keeps the whole motor cool. And it is very essential for that. So it is just 2% from China, but that is very essential. So there are a whole lot of things that can easily be developed in India. But you see, it is not as if the government can do everything. Government cannot. The industry has to pick up the tab. The government, I think in 2020, identified 38 APIs that India can produce and replace our imports. But the government did not give a time frame to each of these companies. Government had a meeting with all the major pharma companies, did not give them a time frame. They have to be given a time frame. They have to be, if necessary, they have to be pressurized, because you are talking about national security. This is national security. The whole country depends on your medicines. Just 20 or 25 major companies, the whole country depends on your medicines. This is national security. So the R&D should be made compulsory. A certain portion of the profit should be kept out, should be earmarked for R&D. Whatever incentives are required should be given to them. But we have to go about Atmanirbhar in a more focused manner, not in the manner of sloganeering. That's the main point I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is Priyanka Pandit also here?
No, sir. Now it's Pranay.
No, then I will now give the floor to our youngest member of this group, Pranay. Pranay, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelkar. It's a privilege to be on the same panel as you. It's been a pleasure hearing all the differing opinions on what everyone on this panel believes are the core issues that need to be addressed in order to ensure that the Indian growth story is not compromised. I think a common thread that has been going along everyone's views is that yes, Atmanirbhar Bharat is an important goal to focus on. However, there are different ways of achieving them. One would be by focusing on internal growth, emphasizing internal industrialization. Another way would be greater integration with the global framework. And the third, which Dr. Mahajan spoke about, was seeing India's growth story within the global framework for trade and investment. And that is the area that I would be focusing on in terms of the issues that I find in the current policy of Indian trade and investment. Now, essentially, as Dr. Mahajan very correctly pointed out, the WTO framework gives India enough of an opportunity to ensure that its interests are not subservient to anyone else's. By way of example, the doctrine of special and differential treatment of developing states vis-a-vis developed states is an essential aspect of the entire WTO framework. There's a reason why public stock holding post the Doha rounds of negotiations is still a sticking point, because I wouldn't use the word that the WTO framework is weak, but I think India has been able to leverage the WTO framework to its advantage by ensuring that certain issues such as public stock holding do not become issues of subsidies that are not allowed by the WTO framework. So one is that I completely agree that the WTO framework allows India the scope of ensuring that its interests are looked after. The second and related issue that came as a consequence was what Ambassador Purushottam said, related to FTAs generally, suggesting that FTAs in principle are against national interests in many ways. While I understand where the argument is coming from, especially in the context of national security, I think the important element is that can you delink trade from the geopolitics, which is the thought that Samir sir began this entire discussion with. Now, the first and foremost thing to point out is that free trade agreements do indeed help in growth. If you need an example of it, the Mexican growth rate dropped to about 2.3% in 2017 when the NAFTA negotiations were in abeyance. So free trade agreements can be to the advantage of states. India, on the other hand, has this very unique circumstance where it has entered into free trade agreements, but invariably those free trade agreements have led to a trade deficit on India's part. So the free trade agreements have not been able to leverage an advantage for India. So that is the core issue. How does India leverage an advantage through the free trade agreements? The second aspect, as I mentioned, was the issue of depoliticization of trade and investment. Now, this issue was stark when we were seeing the discussions of RCEP. There was, of course, the issue of dairy products. There was the issue of MFN clauses in the investment chapter. There was the issue of dumping. But in the background, there was also the issue of the Chinese national security threat by entering into a cooperative partnership in RCEP. Now, this issue of delinking geopolitics with trade and investment is most stark when we look at investment agreements. So bilateral investment agreements and international investment agreements for the protection of foreign investors. Essentially, what they do is ensure that the political risk of an agreement between states is decoupled, and now there's a direct relationship between the investor, the foreign investor in a country, be it from any state, and the host state, which would be India. Now, I find it a core issue that India's investment policy has not been as fearless as India's commercial reform within India. Now, India has terminated 58 of its 84 bilateral investment treaties. And the core linchpin for this termination have been the investment awards that India has suffered as a consequence of, first, the retrospective taxation regime, and second, the fair and equitable treatment standard by virtue of the court system in India delaying enforcement. Now, because of these investment awards coming against India, I feel the Indian policy's knee-jerk reaction was, let's terminate the bilateral investment treaties. It wasn't that let's ensure that the regulatory framework is such that these investment claims do not come through. And that is what I have a fundamental issue with. I think India's investment policy, which is so closely linked to how global trade functions in a world where global value chains are so intrinsically linked, is an essential limitation. And that limitation is starkest when we see the 2016 Model Bilateral Investment Treaty of India. Since and I can engage with the limitations as we go on with this discussion, but I think just to flag that since the 2016 Model Bilateral Investment Treaty has been promulgated, India has only been able to engage in further bilateral investment treaties with states like Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Taiwan, and Brazil. And by this public knowledge that we have, that they're also engaging in the discussions with Cambodia and Philippines. Of all these states, it is only Taiwan which is a net exporter of foreign investment. For all other states that India has entered into bilateral investment treaties with, India is the state and Indian nationals are the investors for these issues. And in this context, the Model Bilateral Investment Treaty, which reduces the sort of substantive protections that Indian investors can get abroad, is, in my opinion, a very strong limitation. So I think the core issue that is consistent amongst the panel is that, yes, India must evolve its internal structure. It must ensure that there's enough investment in the correct sectors, and it must do it within the global framework. The issue remains, how does India leverage this global framework to its advantage? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. I think all our distinguished panelists have spoken on the first part of the challenge shown by Samir in our to us. So now we already, exactly, this is half, as I say, half time. We took about 50 minutes, now only 40 minutes left. So let's go to the second part, which really, to a second and third combined, namely now what are the solutions we can propose? We have all covered the problematic in their own ways, but I think we have to come out with some concrete policy proposals if you really want this discussion take us forward in terms of understanding. So I think I'm going to reverse the order because I'll give up go to Pranay first and give him the chance to quickly propose what he would say the policies which India should adopt.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Kelkar. So I think what I have in mind is the reworking of Indian trade relationships akin to what happened with the NAFTA discussions between the United States of America, Mexico, and Canada, when there was a recognition that national interests need to be accommodated within the free trade framework. So the NAFTA was replaced by the USMCA recently. The USMCA identified certain core sectors where it felt that trade and investment should be focused on. These sectors were oil and gas, power generation, transportation, and the like. These were prioritized over other sectors in order to ensure that there is a level playing field between individuals and traders between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Canada also took the additional step of saying that it will not incorporate investor state arbitration within the framework for itself. So, what I view free trade agreements going forward is that you use the WTO framework, which allows special and differential treatment, especially between trade agreements between developing states, but there's a mechanism by which you leverage it to ensure that your core sectors are not compromised. That's the first aspect of it. The second and related aspect is I do not believe that foreign investment can be delinked from India's trade and economic policy. And in this sense, I believe that India should be as fearless as it has been for domestic reform when it relates to reform of its foreign investment treaties. Just to give you a few key examples, the Indian Model Bilateral Investment Treaty does not afford foreign investors currently the protection of fair and equitable treatment, which is a bare minimum in all investment treaties going elsewhere. What is the fair and equitable treatment standard? It is something as simple as there would not be any discrimination of a foreign investor. The foreign investor can expect that there would be regulatory stability in a state. This does not by any stretch of the imagination state that India will no longer be able to undertake regulatory changes. That is not what the expectation protects. But the idea is that because India has suffered certain investment awards against it, it has given a knee-jerk reaction where its first port of call is to remove the protections themselves. A similar issue is that the reason why investment agreements work so well is because it allows investors to bypass the national court system and internationalize a dispute. Now, in India, that is especially an issue because of our judicial backlogs. So because the civil justice system is so burdened by the number of cases that it faces, having this investor-state dispute settlement mechanism is an important protection that foreign investors would see as an advantage. But the way the Indian Model Bilateral Investment Treaty is currently worded is that there needs to be an exhaustion of local remedies first for a period of 5 years, which means for 5 years, a foreign investor has to be within the courts of India before they can internationalize a claim to arbitration. This is a core sticking point which could reflect the reason why India has been unable to engage into as many bilateral investment agreements as it did in the past on the basis of this new model BIT. And second, and finally, the related issue is that India is also an exporter of foreign investment, which I think it is important for the policy to recognize that India is no longer only a recipient of investment and trade. It is in fact an important global player in sending out investment and commodities. And if there's a recognition of this aspect, that India is actually an exporter of foreign investment, India should allow more robust protections for Indian investors going abroad, which would again strengthen the Indian position in global trade. So those were the things that I think that India can look at going forward, and I'm looking forward to hearing the views of everyone else.
Pranay, thank you for very constructive proposals. Next floor I'll give to Ambassador Purushottam, if you have any concrete proposals to make. You don't unmute, Smita.
Sorry. Yes, Mr. Lekhi had a lot of very, very constructive suggestions to make. And yes, it's true that India is now going abroad and we are investing a lot abroad, which is a very positive thing, because I was just looking at what a very famous economist, Thomas Piketty, had said. Very simple thing, really, that, you know, you accrue the kind of income from assets held abroad, and that adds to your national income, whereas foreign investment in your country actually adds to your liabilities. So India's net international investment position has always been negative, because we have more FDI here than we have ODI abroad, and that's what I think China was trying to do, you know, investing massively abroad. So yes, it's very important to look at this angle of proper protections, and yes, it is perhaps not the best way to look after our interests by just removing those protections. I think that's a very interesting, important point that we need to look at, because I noticed recently a lot of very good high-tech investment had fallen from countries like Switzerland, and they used to invest in high-tech manufacturing. I was wondering whether it's lack of promotional efforts, or I think maybe the BIT, because I was there when they were discussing it, and the Swiss were very exercised about, you know, the BIT. However, having said that, I feel that we have been over generous on the other aspects of the FDI policy. And if we have a little time, we could discuss that, which has not been very good for our national interest. Now, coming back to my core agenda, I think here mentioned how to improve the prospects for economic growth in India. And I think there are two very simple things that we can do. One is that procurement, $500 billion that has been skewed in favor of foreign companies. In fact, if they were so competitive, I don't see why they would go and fix tenders, you know, for foreign companies. We have got so many instances on this. I can start quoting them right away. And so this is one thing. We should really implement the government's policies and announcements on the issue of domestic procurement. That's one. $500 billion stimulus per year. Of course, we can't expect to get all of that. Even $100 billion stimulus, as you know, it would create massive multipliers, because Professor William von Willian, whom I met, MIT director, met at a fantastic seminar on China and American competitiveness. Manufacturing, and especially high-tech manufacturing, create massive multipliers in an economy. So $100 billion of contracts given to the manufacturing sector in India would really, kaya palat jayegi, you know, lots of good things will happen in India. The second thing is my core obsession, and that is R&D. India's R&D intensity has to increase somehow. It has to be on a war footing. Look at the Americans when they saw the Chinese technological challenge. Look at the amount of legislation, the amount of measures they've taken, revived their industrial policy, gone back to their World War II kind of model, you know, in which the most transformational technologies were, you know, produced by the Americans only, because of the huge investment in R&D. And through the defense industries, in fact. So we've made some tentative steps in that direction, but they're very hesitant. And there's a lot of criticism that, you know, DRDO, which is an over-bureaucratized entity, for it to be managing, you know, innovation funds seems to be an oxymoron. I don't know the workings of DRDO, but this is the feedback we get from real innovators. I mean, DRDO actually demands that they should transfer the IPR to them before they give them a little bit of encouragement. Sometimes they take the IPR and don't even give an order. So R&D investment plus procurement, somehow we have to find and elaborate a policy framework for this. This will be a surefire winner. This is what China did. And America also, the procurement assurances from the Pentagon led to a massive increase in their high-tech innovation and productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now request Dr. Mahajan? What proposals we should sort of, policy proposals?
Thank you. Thank you, Vijay Kelkar ji. कुछ बातें एफडीआई को लेकर के हुई और कुछ आगे चल करके हम देश का संचालन किस प्रकार से करें, आर्थिक संचालन, उसके बारे में विचार आया। मेरा ये मानना है कि पिछले 30 वर्षों में जो हमारी मैंने पहले भी कहा कि जो हमारी एफडीआई के प्रति ऑब्सेशन रही, जो हमारी इंपोर्ट्स को लेकर के रही कि हम इंपोर्ट्स बढ़ा लेंगे तो हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स अपने आप बढ़ जाएंगे, हमारी ग्रोथ जो है वो ऑटोमेटिकली हमारे नीचे के लोगों तक पहुंच जाएगी, वो हुआ नहीं। और हमारी ग्रोथ तो हुई लेकिन अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट की समस्या उसी प्रकार से बनी रही, बल्कि ज़्यादा गहरा गई। और जो अच्छा काम हुआ वो केवल एग्रीकल्चर के क्षेत्र में हुआ, जिसके कारण हमारी फूड सिक्योरिटी बनी रही। और बाकी शेष जगह पर हमारी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में हमें कुछ मिल नहीं पाया, और जो कुछ भी ग्रोथ हुई वो सर्विसेज में हुई, और उसमें कहीं पर भी ग्लोबलाइजेशन का कोई योगदान नहीं है। तो यह केवल जो सर्विसेज में हमारी ग्रोथ हुई, सॉफ्टवेयर में हमने डेवलप किया वो, और सॉफ्टवेयर एक्सपोर्ट्स हमारे बढ़े, वो उसमें कहीं पर भी ग्लोबलाइजेशन की पॉलिसीज का नहीं, बल्कि जो रेसिपिएंट कंट्रीज थे जो हमारी सर्विसेज को इंपोर्ट कर रहे थे, उनकी अपनी मजबूरियां थी, जिसके कारण उन्होंने हमारे इंपोर्ट्स स्वीकार किए और हम उनको एक्सपोर्ट कर पाए। तो इसलिए ग्लोबलाइजेशन के बारे में जो बातें आती हैं एफडीआई के बारे में, और जो मैं 2016 में जो भारत सरकार ने निर्णय लिया, मैं प्रणय से कहना चाह रहा था कि वो निर्णय बिल्कुल सही था, क्योंकि हम बहुत बड़ी संख्या में फंसते जा रहे थे नए प्रकार के जो समस्याओं में। इसलिए कोई भी जो सोवरेन नेशन है वो इस प्रकार की गतिविधि को स्वीकार नहीं कर सकता है कि कोई भी कंपनी आकर के भारत सरकार को सू करे, और हम उसमें क्योंकि सरकार का काम केवल इस प्रकार का नहीं रहता है। तो इसलिए हम किसी भी देश को और भारत सरकार को भी यह निर्णय लेने का अधिकार था, वो उन्होंने सही किया कि उन्होंने सनसेट क्लॉज उन 84 या ऑड इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रीटीज के बारे में सनसेट क्लॉज इन्वोक किया। मेरा यहाँ कहना है कि एफडीआई का हम विरोध करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है, लेकिन एफडीआई कहाँ चाहिए, कितनी चाहिए और किन शर्तों पर चाहिए, उसका निर्णय हमें स्वयं करना पड़ेगा। और मैंने जो पहले भी कहा कि आज जरूरत है इस बात की कि हम अपनी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग को रिवाइव करें, हमारे स्मॉल स्केल इंडस्ट्री को रिवाइव करें। अपने देश में हम कैसे यूथ को, जो आज हमारे देश में बात चलती है तो यूथ को केवल सरकारी नौकरी या मल्टीनेशनल कंपनी में नौकरी, उसी को ही हम एम्प्लॉयमेंट मानते हैं। उससे आगे बढ़ करके कैसे हम ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में अपने उद्यमिता विकास करें, एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप डेवलपमेंट करें। ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में हम कैसे जो गैर कृषि जो कृषि से सहायक उद्योग हैं वो चला सकें। बहुत सारे अवसर हैं उसमें, लेकिन हमारी जो ऑब्सेशन रहा केवल और केवल हम एफडीआई, इंपोर्ट्स और तमाम चीज़ों के बारे में हम गांवों की तरफ ध्यान नहीं दे पाए। और जो हमारे अर्थशास्त्रियों का, जो मेन स्ट्रीम इकोनॉमिस्ट थे, उनका हमेशा से ये रहा कि गांवों से कुछ नहीं हो सकता है, गांवों से लोगों को बाहर लेकर के जाना पड़ेगा। मुझे लगता है कि वो सोच गलत थी, वो गलत प्रूफ भी हुई, क्योंकि जब हमने कोविड के समय में देखा कि कैसे लोगों को वापस जाना पड़ा और उनकी क्या हालात थे, उससे समझ में आता है कि जो हमारी माइग्रेशन की पॉलिसी थी वो ठीक प्रकार से काम नहीं की। अंत में मैं एक बात कहूंगा कि ये जो बात आ रही है कि वर्तमान में जो जियोपॉलिटिकल सिचुएशंस आ रही हैं, क्या हमें उसके कारण कुछ अपनी नीति को में बदलाव करना चाहिए। मुझे लगता है कि वो आज की जियोपॉलिटिकल सिचुएशन यह इस बात को इंगित कर रही है कि हमें आत्मनिर्भरता की तरफ आगे बढ़ना ही होगा। हर चीज में आत्मनिर्भरता करनी पड़ेगी, हमें अपने पेमेंट सिस्टम में आत्मनिर्भरता करनी पड़ेगी, हमें अपने उद्योगों में आत्मनिर्भरता करनी पड़ेगी, हमें अपनी कृषि में आत्मनिर्भरता करनी पड़ेगी। किसी भी प्रकार का किसी भी कंट्री पर डिपेंडेंस मुझे नहीं लगता कि वो समाधान दे सकता है। आज हमने देखा कि अगर रूस हमें ये ऑफर कर रहा है कि हम सस्ता तेल उससे ले सकें, हमारे अंदर इतनी क्षमता होनी चाहिए पेमेंट सिस्टम्स के माध्यम से कि हम उसका सस्ता तेल को लाभ ले सकते हैं। उसी प्रकार से हम अपने देश की जो नीतियां हैं, किसी एक देश या किसी एक ब्लॉक के आधार पर नहीं, हम अपने नीतियां जो हैं वो जिसको हम कहें कि इंडिपेंडेंटली, स्वतंत्र रूप से उनको बना सकें, उनको चलाने की क्षमता हम अपने अंदर विकसित कर सकें। और उसके लिए जरूरी है कि चाहे वो सेमीकंडक्टर्स हैं, चाहे वो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स हैं, चाहे वो टेलीकॉम हैं। हमने उस समय जब टेलीकॉम में 5G का हुआवे का विरोध किया था तो बहुत सारे लोगों ने कहा था कि हम नई टेक्नोलॉजी का विरोध कर रहे हैं, लेकिन हमने देखा कि अगर हुआवे आ जाता तो उसके कारण हमारे देश में जो 5G है वो आगे डेवलप नहीं कर सकता। सितारा के नाते एम्बेसडर पुरुषोत्तम ने भी उसके लिए बहुत अच्छा प्रयास किया और उसके कारण आज हम देख रहे हैं कि हम अपना इंडिजीनियस 5G डेवलप करने की तरफ आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। मुझे लगता है यह एक उदाहरण है। इसी प्रकार के उदाहरणों को हमें खड़ा करना पड़ेगा अपने देश को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए। बस, धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू अश्विनी जी। May I now request Dr. Natarajan to say his proposals.
Oh, sure, Dr. Gilbert. Yeah, just a few thoughts. One is, listening to Ashwini जी, आपने जो कहा मैं बिल्कुल सहमत हूँ आपके जो विचार हैं, क्योंकि काफी हद तक बहुत जैसे मैन्युफैक्चरिंग की बात की थी आपने, वो बिल्कुल करना चाहिए। एंड आई थिंक स्मिता ऑल्सो सेड दैट दिस इज रियली हाईटेक मैन्युफैक्चरिंग दैट will be the future for India. But I want to make 2 or 3 points. One is, if you don't count the problems but count what we have achieved, one is of course the vaccination drive. I think for a country as large as India, to do what we have done in vaccinations, including the production of both vaccines, has been absolutely amazing. So it just shows the resilience of the economy and the capability of the pharma sector. So that's one. Second, of course, I think Saibal also mentioned the IT sector. And I've been part of this sector for the last 20 years. And a lot of people think that, oh, this was private enterprise and it was TCS and Infosys who did it. But this has been a very phenomenal example of extremely good collaboration between government and the IT sector. I still remember talking to the then Secretary of the Department of Electronics, which is today MIT. And the vision with which they came up with the software technology park scheme, they enabled an entire industry to succeed. I'm not in agreement that we should not be importing stuff. So there is no point in developing hardware, which has already been developed extremely well by companies. So what the IT services sector showed was that if you ride on existing capabilities, do imports where required, at the same time build a $200 billion growth industry, that can be fabulous. The third point I want to make is the big opportunity in front of us. और अश्विनी जी आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा कि हमें ये नहीं कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि सब गांव से लोगों को निकाल के सिटीज में मूव करें. So that will be excessive urbanization. But ये जरूर कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि how do we take a digital India kind of example. Like all of you know, in the $5 trillion GDP that we are envisaging in a couple of years' time, $1 trillion will come from the digital economy. And if you take one stellar example that I think India has done better than the rest of the world, which we should build on as a pathway to the future, it is this whole area of digital India in terms of UPI. UPI and the whole payments ecosystem in India is second to none. And when you look at the payment system in other parts, so-called developed parts of the world, this is phenomenally better. So the India stack, the fact that so many payment entrepreneurs are coming through and larger entities like the State Bank of India, where I'm on the board, as well as the private banks are doing well, is an example. And my belief is, if you look at digital India, one pathway clearly is to create UPI kind of platforms for agriculture, where a whole ecosystem can collaborate, for employment, where the employment exchanges can come up all over India. So somebody sitting in Jharkhand will know where the opportunity is and can choose their jobs. The third, of course, is SMEs, because SME clusters must collaborate with OEMs as well as with themselves, and we have to make that happen. And last but not the least, even areas like innovation. I think Ambassador Purushottam very rightly mentioned that where we have lagged is in having significant R&D investments, and we've really lagged in innovation, enterprise, etc., etc. And that is an area where I think China has done extremely well, because if you look at artificial intelligence, which is going to drive many, many trillion dollars of new revenues to the various global economies, I think China has almost outstripped the US in terms of their investments, and we've not done enough. So I think augmentative technologies, extreme innovation, really looking at being a front runner. I mean, today we're talking about being net zero by 2070, but the opportunity to be a totally green economy as we grow, I think those are going to be very important pathways. Lastly, I must re-emphasize that our manufacturing sector as a percentage of GDP has been slipping steadily. And I don't think we can grow and provide employment for another 300 million people in this country if we don't substantially improve labor intensive manufacturing. Some people believe that we have missed the bus. I don't agree. But even if you look at just semiconductor manufacturing and high tech, that itself can create employment for many, many millions of people. And even what we see as, even from the State Bank of India board, when we look at the proposals coming in, a lot of labor intensive stuff happening in electronics, which will take forward. So electronics, pharma, automobile, where we're already dominating the whole EV space, the electric vehicle space, all these are opportunities. And like I started with by saying how we should compete with China, if you look at the pathways for the medium term of 2030 and the long term of 2047, I think making sure that we identify economic capabilities like we did in IT, boost them and have at least 5 or 6 champion sectors. And as was rightly said, not just depend on foreign investment, but also look at enabling Indian companies to grow and dominate first in India and in the world. I think that will be the true path. I am an absolute optimist. I believe we can do it. It just needs a strong focus and saying, let's get it done because we owe it to our country to make it happen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Vijay Kelkar, I would like to come in between for a while.
Please.
What I want to say here is that today we are capable enough in our technology, and obviously we have shown to the world in terms of payment technology and others that we can even stand in front of the West if they try to bring in any sanctions. Then we should be able to stand before them. And in fact, recently I have made a comment that our UPI system can collaborate with the other systems of other countries, whereby wherever the sanctions come, that we can counter them. So our technological development is very, very important. R&D is very, very important, but that doesn't, in fact, requires us to change our tracks of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Thank you.
Thank you. May I request now Dr. Vani is there?
Yes, sir. I am here. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yes, sir. India have from last 10 to 12 years done tremendous job. I can say wonderful job to take people out of poverty. However, India is still having the poorest families in the world. For example, the poorest 20% of the households earn only 4% of the total income. So India should also increase incentives to reduce poverty as well as to increase their income. One recommendation is that. Second is India should stress more on infrastructure and give fillip to innovation industries, which can obviously help us in manufacturing, like that in pharma sector. We know how much via pharma sector we export to Central Asian countries, to Eurasian Union and other areas. India should also stress on green economy, as most of the population in our country, especially in urban areas, are exposed to harmful levels of pollution. That is not good for a developing country. And in next 10-20 years, if we will not go for green economy, so our cities will not be good for living. Also, Fourth recommendation, we need also to give more professional training to our youth in colleges and especially at rural areas. More and more funds should be allocated in this direction so that tomorrow we can have a good infrastructure plus good manufacturing sector where we need more professional youth rather than educated youth. Last but not least, we should also increase women participation in this economic development and economic activity because we know that women are not given such situation where they can help to build our nation economically. Thank you. It is all from here.
Thank you very much. Now, our last question will be by Saibal, and then I'll request me to have any point, and I'll make my final remarks. Saibal ji. आपको अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा सैबल जी.
Hi.
Thank you.
Okay. Very interesting discussion and lot of insights. Thank you. I have a few suggestions. One is in all our discussions, we should not ignore a fact that the Ukraine invasion story is going to be there for a long, long time. It is going to impact a lot of thinking. It is going to impact
which story? I'm sorry, I missed the point. Which story going to be there?
The invasion of Ukraine.
Okay, great.
You cannot think as if it is an incident that has happened and it will go away. No, it will not, because the dynamics are changing and it will have a long-term effect. So one proposal that I am making, and I am told that the Ministry of Commerce is also thinking along those lines. I was only told today, is about the possibility of having an arrangement between ruble, rupee, and the renminbi. A three-currency arrangement in which the focus will be more on barter trade. And that is how, of course, it will be pegged at a regular parity level, which means you get Russian goods at a heavy discount of 40% or even more. But this is a suggestion that is worth pursuing because it will help these three countries expand their trade and reduce their reliance on the West. That is one point. The second thing Mr. Natarajan was mentioning about raw earth and the massive possibility of increasing employment opportunities through rare earth. I was looking at the numbers and it is surprising, and at least I am surprised, that we are the 5th largest producers of rare earth in the world. And we are producing 6.9 metric tons of rare earth, whereas the United States and Greenland put together produce 1.5 metric tons. And nobody in Europe produces any rare earth. The only rare earth in Europe that was produced was in Russia, and Russia is no more with Europe in some ways. Of course, China is leading the rare earth scenario with 44 tons. But it is very surprising that as far as the West is concerned, Europe and US doesn't produce anything. Australia produces. Australia is the 4th largest. So this itself offers us a massive, unbelievable opportunity to expand. Not just employment, but industry, ancillary industries, new technologies, collaborations. That is one. Secondly, one reason why China grew is they involved the universities in industry building, the R&D departments of the universities, and they managed to reward the universities in the process. Today, many universities, for example, I think the Peking University and the Tsinghua University in Beijing are shareholders in more than 60 or 65 companies. So So we have not involved a lot of educational and capabilities that can be utilized for R&D, because there is no question that R&D has to grow, and we have been lagging in that area. So can we involve universities? Can we involve, encourage business to have arrangements with universities, and whatever else is required to create new companies, to encourage startups to join hands with universities? This is the second area that we should consider.
I put it open. Hello?
Yeah,
Please continue.
yeah. Then, as I said earlier, that we need a very honest assessment of what are the areas that in which our import dependence is actually threatening our security. And it can be anything. It can be motor parts. It can be, it can be specialty chemicals, which is a very important area and where we are lacking. It could be the point where the chemicals combine with alloys and other things. So there is a whole range of areas where we can develop. And I think we should give another shot of bringing back some of our experts who are abroad. Somehow NRI is no more an important story in India. Getting the NRIs back is a story that has been given up. But I think that story should never be given up. One reason why China grew is because of overseas Chinese. And overseas Chinese not only came back with ideas and money, but did more. Even while they were in the US, they provided information. A lot of people consider spying. But from the view of the Chinese, he was not spying, he was doing it for his country. So whatever, one can argue either ways. But the point is, this is a story that we have to rethink and see how we can utilize them. This is all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebel. Amir, you want to make the final points? You have to unmute yourself.
Just closing remarks, sir.
Okay. Now, let me first thank all the participants for extremely thoughtful and extensive proposals. I thought I will take a different perspective because we're talking about what are major problematic about it. The way I see India is literally very, very poor in terms of natural resources, either land management or availability of water or availability of energy. What we are abundant is our enormous human capital, the long on human capital, and if I may say so, our democracy. Democracy is ours, in my view, a very, very strategic sort of strength. So we have to leverage these two strengths. Now, the only way we can leverage by trade, because we just don't have enough resources. So natural resources. So Japan, which also is very poor on natural resources, how do they progress? Essentially through trade. So I think we must look at trade as an opportunity to overcome our weaknesses in terms of availability. So please, I would request you to think about it, that when you go away from trade, any going away from imports is essentially going away from exports and essentially growth. Because all your Atmanirbhar policies are essentially anti-exports. Because that's what they imply in terms of economics. So just remember that there is no free land, but so-called Atmanirbhar policy essentially leads in problems in other sectors and reduces our entirely the growth possibilities. So I think we have to be extremely careful because we have other instruments to achieve what you want. For instance, all of us are really worried about FTA. The reason, one of the major reasons why India lost manufacturing sector is because of taxation policy. Our domestic taxation is extremely distortive in terms of heavily taxed our manufacturing sector. by which we could not export. Even today, our GST doesn't allow full reimbursement of tax to our exports. Actually, export is non-competitive. So our problem is our internal tax policy, which is extremely anti-exports and anti-efficiency. So I think that's, I would argue, as a major problematic, rather than sort of we're just piling up, every budget is now piling up import tariffs, and which is just making our exports non-competitive and our economy non-competitive. So I think we have to think very carefully. Third issue is the institutions. I said myself that our democracy is a great strength in my view. But remember, I want to invite you what I learned from my mentor. He used to tell me, Vijay, closed economy leads to closed minds. Now, Atmanirbharta, which is closed economy, we are moving to model. I'm sorry to say, it will lead to closed minds in India. I think open is extremely important for ideas. Openness to ideas, then only India can grow. So I would urge that we have to think about the Atmanirbhar ending up on sort of closing our minds also, because if you're not open, openness is fundamental for, I think, growth in my view. And our institution has to be modernized. Take the example of our tariff commission. I'm just giving one example. If you're worried about dumping, have a very, very vibrant tariff commission like International Trade Commission in the United States. That will give you the most knowledge-based and predictable protection. But we are not doing that. We do arbitrary money. You know, Samir, India is the most egregious user of anti-dumping duties. Most egregious user, which completely creates, to pick up the Pranay's point, we lose credibility in our international arena because our very, very arbitrary systems of anti-dumping, which can be avoided if you have better systems of governance. People are making the point of API. This is a very interesting point. You know, take the example of Huawei. Huawei set up R&D center in India 1997 because they knew India strength with highly technical manpower. There are 7,000 Indian engineers working in Huawei, producing one extremely high-level IP. What stopped Indian entrepreneurs from investing in China to produce API? Because they could have, it would have been produced by our, because as Professor Govardhan Mehta, India's most distinguished chemist, points out that these are extremely, they're not very sophisticated molecules. Indian industries to produce them, but required inputs are available in China cheap. Also, because invested there, like what Huawei did, looking forward, 1997 they invested in India and they created R&D center because they knew India has this advantage. You could have done the same thing instead of sort of bringing down shutters, and now probably will make our even pharma industry non-competitive. I think we have to be a little more sort of different, more clever in what instrument we use. And entire experience last 2 centuries has been a trade, has been a handmaiden of growth. So please don't give up, don't commit harakiri by giving up the instrument of policy which will increase India's growth rate. Trade has been handmaiden. Take any country, China, Japan, all institution models, they use trade. Similarly, with a latecomer like Germany, when it was competing with the 19th century, used trade. United States used trade. So trade has been the handmaiden of growth. So please, I would urge you to be very, very carefully that we are taking ourselves, denying ourselves some of the instruments, policy instruments, and losing out what is our strength, namely human capital. Because that we should valorize them, get value to them by through trade. So I think we had a very rich discussion. I know you can't solve India's problem in 90 minutes, but I thought I'll just share my sort of reflections. They're a little old-fashioned, but I'm afraid that only reflects my old knowledge, I suppose. I still sort of go back to Arthur Lewis, where it looks at how to transform India. I still think Sir Arthur Lewis' insights are still very valid, or insights of my old professor, Sukhmay Chakrabarti, or even the old professors of Dhanar Mardal and others. They still, to me, sort of provide a better understanding to think how we should progress further. So I think we already exceeded by 5 more minutes. So I want to once again thank you all, and I give the floor and mic back to Rohan for taking this to conclusion. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much for what I thought was an excellent panel with interventions that I'm sure will have far-reaching implications for India's foreign trade policy. But before we end, sir, I just wanted to, on a personal note, thank Dr. Vijay Kelkar because, sir, the advice that you and ma'am had given me over lunch at Pune, I actually took it, and I'm a lawyer now. I dropped my PhD. And I've become a lawyer now. So thank you for that. You inadvertently started my career.
Lata, so we have to repeat it, Rohan. Lata?
Ma'am, I was just telling sir the advice that the both of you had given over lunch.
Please repeat, Rohan.
नमस्कार मैम, आप
तो कैसे हैं?
मैं
कैसे आप?
प्रणाम, बहुत अच्छा हूँ, मैं बहुत अच्छा हूँ। मैं बस सर को यही बता रहा था कि उस दिन आपने लंच पे पुणे में जो मुझे सलाह दी थी मैंने ले ली और मैंने पीएचडी छोड़ के वकालत कर ली।
Wonderful.
Oh.
Very good.
I hope you're happy.
I am, man. I am. I'm so very happy.
Are we going to see you in Delhi? Are you in Delhi?
Yes, ma'am, I am. I would love to drop by for a cup of coffee sometime.
Good,
Yes,
good.
we
will come with us.
He'll be meeting us.
Okay. Okay, great. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank
All
you
the
very
best.
much. Thank you, Dr. Kelkar. Thank you, Mahajan ji. Thank you, Smita ji. Thank you, Azaz. Thank you, Seval. And thank you, Pranay. Very grateful for giving your time. Thank you.